Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, morimili wanji, namaste, jumbo. Bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so very delighted that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, wherever you find your podcasts. We have two wonderful guests today. They're returning to the show, Caroline Bliss Larsen and Dr. Raun Melmed. They're here to celebrate Marvin's Monster Diary 5 ADHD Self-Esteem Blues. Before we invite Dr. Raun and Caroline back into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Escape from Grimstone Manor, book number 1 in the Monsterious middle grade novel series written by Matt McMahon. Wow, you and your kids are going to absolutely love Monsterious. What a great series. If you are a fan of Goosebumps, Stranger Things, and Five Nights at Freddy's, Monsterious books are for you. You're going to love it. Now, in book number 1, Escape from Grimstone Manor, 3 friends are trapped overnight in a haunted house amusement park ride and discover that the monsters are real. Can they solve the mystery and survive the night? If you want to find out, you've got to read the book. It's Monsterious book number 1, Escape from Grimstone Manor. You're going to love this book. Your kids are going to love this book. You're not going to be able to put them down. I promise you. Check it out today. Monsterious Escape from Grimstone Manor, written by Matt McMahon. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is also brought to you by Lucas and the Game of Chance, a thrilling middle grade novel written by Anthony L. Manna, and it is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read. While Lucas is playing his flute at the seawall one day, he befriends a mysterious talking dancing snake that rewards him with fortune and favor. Some years later, tempted by greed and pride, Lucas loses all his riches and his family. He must now set off on a treacherous journey through a frightening forest filled with suspense and strange creatures to find destiny. Her son, Ilion the sun, and her daughter, Luna the moon. These celestial guardians will surely allow him to reverse his misfortune, restore his honor, and win back all that he loves and treasures. Won't they? A reimagined Greek folktale, Lucas and the Game of Chance, is illuminated with dramatic and evocative pen and ink drawings that provide an ideal backdrop for the dark intrigue that fills this haunting story of human struggle, courage, and resilience. You and your kids are going to love Lucas and the Game of Chance. It's written by Anthony L. Manna. It's available on Amazon, and you can check out our full review on our Reading with Your Kids certified great read page. Oh, I am so excited. We have 2 of my favorite guests back on the show today. They're here to celebrate Marvin's Monster Diary number 5 ADHD Self-Esteem Blues. Please welcome back to the show. First, coming to us from Arizona, Dr. Raun Melmed. Dr. Raun, how are you?
Doing well. A little hot, but otherwise fine.
Super to have you back, and also joining us from the great state of Utah, Caroline Bliss Larsen. Hey, Caroline, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks again for having us.
I'm so excited. Caroline, can you remind us who Marvin is and all about this great series of diaries that you and Dr. Raun have created?
So Marvin the Monster is, he is a monster, but he, in a lot of ways, is kind of just like a regular kid, in that he goes to school, he has a family, he plays sports, he plays music. So he kind of has a regular kid life, but he deals with ADHD and this series explores him kind of understanding how to manage his emotions, manage his attention and his behavior, using tools that he actually comes up with a lot of the time. You know, he has some guidance from adult figures in his life, but a lot of the times he's the one coming up with these tools. And so that's kind of what this series does. And then Marvin is kind of our hero who guides us through all of this. And the books have illustrations, kind of in a fun diary style, kind of similar to Diary of a Wimpy Kid, but obviously very different kind of stories, but kind of similar line drawings and just kind of silliness. So it doesn't take itself too seriously. So yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Raun, the subtitle of diary number 5, ADHD Self-Esteem Blues. You know, I think a lot of parents, when they're dealing with kids who have extra energy, as I like to say, you know, it's all this, oh, this kid's such a pain in the neck. And I don't think they realize a lot of times that that kid with a lot of extra energy who doesn't seem to care about anybody else probably cares a lot and probably understands that he's making life difficult for a lot of people and doesn't feel real good about himself.
Yeah, I think that you struck a real important chord because, you know, when we think about ADHD, we think about two things. Number one, we think about having the symptoms of ADHD: distractibility, hyperactivity, inattentiveness, lack of task persistence, things like that. But an essential part of the diagnosis is not just having the symptoms, but also the fact that the symptoms actually must hurt you, must harm you, must cause you suffering. And usually when we think of the hurt or the dysfunction or the functional impairments that some of the people with ADHD have, children or adults, we think of how it impacts school performance, academic performance, or we think about their behavior. Parents complain about the child's behavior. They're terrible, they're off the wall, they're doing this, they're getting into trouble. We don't always take the time to think about its impact on children. And its impact and the functional impairment of self-esteem is absolutely huge. And that is really the reason behind why we chose this aspect of a child's functioning to focus on. Now, self-esteem is obviously something that exists to some extent or another in all of us. So even though the book is focused on, the series is focused on ADHD, this idea of looking at self-esteem is something that I think impacts every single child, typical or not, and definitively those with ADHD. That's the genesis of the book. That's how we all started it.
Yeah. Well, you know, we've celebrated all the different books in the series here on the podcast, and I love so many things I love about your approach. Because you've been dealing with kids with ADHD and other behavioral problems for many years right now.
Well, not that many. No, I'm just a little self-conscious about the aging process, what we do. But absolutely. And what became apparent is that very often in counseling, in addressing the issue of children, coming up with the same kinds of ideas. And that's where I thought thought that let's translate that and make it available and amenable and accessible to so many more children by putting it in a kind of a fun, exciting kind of series. Because I firmly believe that if you give a child agency, if you give them responsibility, if you teach them tools, if you give them a rod to catch that proverbial fish, they'll never go hungry. And their self-esteem will never drop. And that's what the whole goal of developmental pediatrics is, to try and figure out how to give children the appropriate, developmentally appropriate tools in order for them to address their own problems and to help to solve them. And if we succeed at that, we've done a huge job. I won't say that it's an easy job, and I don't imagine that, 100% success is going to be achieved. But this is just one of the ways, one of the arrows in the quiver of armamentarium that we can utilize to help improve the lives of those children with ADHD, along with many other things, counseling, medications, etc.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned giving kids agency, and I think that's so important. My beautiful wife was a special needs teacher for over 34 years, and a lot of times she would share with me when she had a kid who had that extra energy and was disruptive in a class and maybe didn't take their medication on a particular morning. If she were to give that student a task, a job, something special just for that student to do, to focus on, that would make all the difference in the world. And suddenly, the student, he wasn't, and I keep using he because ADHD isn't just a boy thing, but it seems to be a lot of boys deal with it. And, giving that child that responsibility made a huge difference and really helped the kid get himself under control in the classroom so that he and everybody else could learn.
It's a surefire way to enhance self-esteem by giving a child a task that they're going to succeed in. And in fact, Carolyn gives the monster, Marvin, lots of different tasks. And when the child succeeds themselves, and they can see that they can take a task, no matter how simple it is, but without being bogus, without being real, you have a specific responsibility that we want you to do, young fella. And when they do that, the ripple effects that it has in so many different areas is absolutely enormous. Not to mention, which helps to improve the whole interaction between the child and the teacher. Mm-hmm. Once the child is recognized by the teacher, the peers will also notice, look, the teacher's paying attention to that kid. He must be a good kid after all. So that there are many reasons why, if teachers take the initiative to do exactly what your beautiful wife used to be doing when she was the teacher, help self-esteem, help socialization, help interaction, help the child succeed.
Yeah. Carolyn, it must have been interesting for you to watch Marvin grow. Talk a little bit about his growth and your own growth in terms of your knowledge of ADHD and how we best treat it.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to see Marvin grow, which sounds like a funny thing for an author to say because, we have some level of control over how he grows, right? But something that is interesting to keep in mind in writing a series is trying to be realistic about ways that a character might grow, and also recognizing that even if they learned a lesson or they had some sort of growth in the previous book, doesn't mean they're not going to struggle again, maybe even with some of the same things. How many of us in our lives struggle with things more than once? And it's just sort of an ongoing process, right? And so while in a lot of ways, I think this newest book about self-esteem, we see Marvin knowing about some of these tools that he learned, ST4, for example, in previous books. He sort of has to find new ways to apply it as he faces new challenges. And, what he faces in this book is kind of a special challenge with self-esteem. Now, I think a lot of things that he struggled with in previous books could also be sort of adjacent to self-esteem, or maybe were sort of indirectly about self-esteem already, but it kind of really hits him a little bit harder in this book. And I think it's been very interesting for me personally as co-author in the series to learn about these tools that Raun shares in his clinic, and kind of figure out ways to help teach kids these tools, but also trying to put them in my own life, mm-hmm. which seems like it should be an obvious thing to do, right? But it is sort of a funny thing to remember in my daily life. Oh, I should stop and take time to think about mm-hmm. why this thing is stressing me out so much, or maybe why I said something that might have accidentally come off a little bit rude or something. So finding ways to implement that in my own life, I think has helped me grow, or at least helped me become more aware of these kinds of mindfulness techniques that the whole series is about.
Yeah. Dr. Raun, it's interesting, kids are spending so much time on social media, and one of the things I see constantly on social media is, I guess, self-appointed gurus coming on and, saying, you got this, and all these kind of slogans and messages that are, hey, you're special, you are wonderful just the way you are. And I think, that was something that we heard maybe 30, 40 years ago. Oh, you just have to tell kids that they're wonderful, and then they'll buy into that. But it takes more than just a slogan to help a kid feel good about themselves and have that good self-esteem. Am I right about that, Dr. Raun?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that kids pick up on parents or teachers being bogus all the time. They will do that. And I think that when they hear, good job, such a sweet boy, such a nice boy, such a bright kid, not good.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be really specific about the praise. We have to be really real about it. So, if a child brings you something that's a little bit messy, rather than saying, for example, that's disgusting and that's terrible. This, by the way, I'm not sure why I lost my camera, but that's a whole nother story.
That's fine. It's not disgusting at all.
Okay. Well, there we go. So, if we are specific, saying, I like the way you really took your time to try to get this right, or I like the way you actually got the beak of the little bird right, as opposed to saying, what a good job, when the kid knows maybe it wasn't such a wonderful drawing, and they pick up on that really real. So we do encourage, and it's in the book as well, for parents to be really real and specific about the praise, rather than rather than doing anything else. The other aspect, just to go on what you said about social media, there's a real weird situation going down when a lot of kids are going online and they're learning about how to self-diagnose themselves, and are coming to us in the clinic with saying, I've read online that I've got this or dysphoria, or I've got some kind of weird mood problem, or I've got something else. We definitely encourage parents not to label and not to jump towards label. We do encourage, and as well as it, even though we do make diagnoses, we want to look at a child from a very holistic perspective. So calling a child ADHD doesn't help anyone understand that child. But letting someone know, this is a child who has this kind of socialization challenge, who has this kind of worries on the forefront of their mind every day, who has this kind of learning pattern, and who has this kind of self-esteem, and we can be specific about that, then we have a real holistic picture. And that's the name. I hate to just rely on ADHD as if that's something really real. We have to focus on what's the child about, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are in all these variety of different domains. Their socialization, their self-esteem, their emotional interaction, their diets, their interaction with their parents and their peers are also important.
Yeah. When you talk, my beautiful wife, she's heard all this. Well, this one has ADHD and that one has ADHD. The kids are very, very different, and that the label means nothing. Yeah, it's so
absolutely. As part of a child's individualized educational plan, parents with special needs children know all about an IEP or an individualized education. The first paragraph of that is the most important. That is, what is the student's profile? What is this child really all about? If we stop and pay attention and look at the child on the horizon, see what they are really about in a very holistic kind of way, we'll be going a long way to really individualizing our approaches towards education, and for the child to recognize that they've been identified and recognized for their own strengths. When they do that, they get that agency, getting back to where we started.
Absolutely. Caroline, it's interesting. You know, Dr. Raun used the word bogus a little while ago, and that's a phrase you don't typically associate with doctors when they're on a podcast. But that's why I love Dr. Raun. And how is it working with somebody who is such a leader in his field and in a field that's not yours? You know, you write kids books. You aren't treating kids with behavioral issues.
Yeah, it's been really a joy to work with Dr. Melmed. This is not a series that I would try to write by myself. Like you said, I'm not an expert in this field. I consider it a real treat to have learned a lot from Raun and from other sources because of this series. And, you know, I often have a tendency to kind of undercut myself and be like, well, you know, I'm not an expert. So, you know, I'll just let Raun speak on this instead. And every single time I say that, he says, you know more than you think you do. And I just think that's really lovely. He's really a delight to work with.
Yeah. Well, that's that self-esteem thing, you know, he's helping. And I think that's, and I'm saying it kind of jokingly, but I think it's really important for us to understand that self-esteem is something that kind of everybody has to struggles with from time to time. And it's something that we can all help each other with. And I think one of the ways we can do it is, like Dr. Raun said, give somebody a compliment, let them know, but specific, not this bogus, oh, you're wonderful.
Absolutely. And something that I really have appreciated in discussions with Raun is that he seems to really emphasize the praising the process more than the outcome. And, you know, I think he touched on that a little bit already, but I think that's a really lovely way to look at, you know, mental health, self-image, self-esteem, because I think sometimes, you know, for people who have maybe always sort of focused on the achievement, the outcome of a process, that makes it really difficult when inevitably you fail, because we all fail when we do things. And then sometimes it can kind of feed into these sort of perfectionistic type of loops where we think, well, you know, I didn't do this thing exactly how I wanted to, and, you know, that makes me feel really crummy, or I was able to do this before, but now I didn't do such a good job. Maybe I'm losing my touch. Maybe, you know, there's all these kind of stories we can tell ourselves. But I think, you know, from a parenting perspective, if we're encouraging children to recognize their efforts, their process, then, you know, I think it helps them appreciate themselves a little bit better, even if it doesn't go exactly to plan.
Yeah.
And I think that helps grow into better adults where we can appreciate our efforts and not just focus in on our imperfections.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting you mentioned adults and growing into to be better, happier adults. A lot of the adults who have to deal with kids with struggling with ADHD and self-esteem, I think a lot of them might be in a moment where they might blame themselves. What did I do to cause this kid to have this? Can you talk a little bit about that, Dr. Raun? You know, when I was growing up, I at least didn't hear the word ADHD, and it was introduced to me when I entered into human services back in the 70s. But at that time, there were just, you know, maybe 1 out of 100 kids would have that label on it. Now it seems there are so many kids. So can you just talk about, you know, maybe why we're seeing more kids like that, and also kind of help put parents at ease that it's not something a parent causes, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. There's nothing really new under the sun. So I think that the issue, you know, children who have ADHD have always been around. Unfortunately, in the past, these children were often called lazy, crazy, stupid. They were often problems. They lived a life of misery. The beauty of ADHD is that it's helped us. I see it as a kind of lens through which we can look at individual differences and help to understand and celebrate those differences. If instead of having snap decisions, We just look a little bit under the hood and say, well, what's different about this kid? What makes them tick? Why are they so very overly active? Why are they having so much difficulty in math? Why aren't they interacting well with their peer group? Why aren't they being invited to their birthday parties? Why can't they just sit around the dinner table? When we start to analyze and dissect those things and we understand that, it is so, it's a beautiful thing. And I think that's the gift that ADHD has given to children, to saying, we're not going to just say, label kids lazy, crazy, and stupid, as I started off saying. We're actually going to start to figure out differences. Mm-hmm. Now, the issue is that these things often do run in families. We know that this is a genetic problem. We know that there's underlying neurobiology, there are different dopamine and serotonergic issues and biochemical changes that occur in the brain of children. There's different frontal lobe issues which occur in the brains of children with ADHD compared to those kids without. We know it's neurobiological, but we also know that parents not only provide the genetics, but they also provide the environment. So the frightening thing about parenting is that genetics is that parents provide actually both. That's kind of a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But if you have there often is the truth that the parent themselves will have ADHD. They will also have that proclivity, as it is a genetically inherited disorder, at least to some extent. Mm-hmm. So they too have also had a lifetime of struggle. They too, most likely, have had challenges with self-esteem. So they become very sensitive when they see those same issues happening in their child. They know the trauma and the difficulties that is. They know what it's like being kicked out of a classroom. They know what it's like to be ostracized. They know what it's like not being invited to that birthday party. They know how that impacts self-esteem when everyone else in the class is getting a 10 and their teacher writes on their paper with big red marks, disgusting, do this again, or mm-hmm. something like that. They've been through that. Mm-hmm. So the parents often come in as part of the overall picture. So when we speak about self-esteem, the capacity to feel good and comfortable with oneself, the parents shake their head because they know truly what we're talking about. And they so much want to participate in getting their own children to feel good about themselves. They don't want to see their children suffer in the same way that they did.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, before we go, Caroline, I just want to ask you, the books that you've written have helped so many kids. I mean, just the stop, take time to think, learning that kind of message, that kind of instruction for your life can make such a difference in kids' lives. I know you didn't set forth, as a children's author, you wanted to bring joy to kids, but have you taken time to realize that with the Marvin's Monster Diary series, you've made a huge impact in kids' lives and in their mental health?
It's really, I almost don't know what to say to that other than thank you. I'm really, really glad it is helping people. Sometimes when I'm in the trenches of writing, brainstorming, trying to market a book, trying to promote and sell a book, it can be easy sometimes to forget why I'm doing something, right? I just think, I have to get this book out so it will sell more and our publisher will want to do more books. But one of my favorite things about this journey as an author has been to meet with kids and with their parents. Occasionally I'll do Zoom classroom meetings, where I'll read to the students from the book and we'll talk a little bit about writing and I'll share some of the tools from the books. And it is really, really gratifying to see how excited they get about the books. And to, when I'm doing events, maybe at a booth and parents come up and they talk to me about the books and I'm like, wow, that's really amazing. I'm definitely going to get this book because I really think that could help my child. It's such a gratifying thing. And every single time I come away from these experiences just feeling so much lighter, so much more excited, and just really itching to keep writing and doing more in the series.
Well, as a dad of somebody who had a lot of extra energy, and as I look back on my own life, Dr. Raun, I probably had a lot of extra energy because I certainly was thrown out of my share of classrooms. I want to thank you both for creating the series because I think it is, it's just filled. They're great stories. They're lots of fun, but also filled with some really practical advice and life lessons that can make a difference in kids' lives and the lives of their families. So I want to thank both of you. Caroline, tell us where we can go to find out more about you and the great books that you're creating.
I have a website that's just my name.com. So Caroline Bliss Larsen, it's Larsen with an E, .com. And you can buy our books from our publisher, Familius.com, or anywhere online that books are sold. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah. And Dr. Raun, tell us also a little bit about the website for your clinic, in case folks want to get some more information.
Well, if you want to go to our website, you better go quickly because we're just changing our website because we become part of Cortica, which is a group of pediatric neurology and developmental pediatricians across the country. So that's very exciting. So we will soon be part of Cortica Care. Our current website is melmedcenter.com. And you're certainly welcome to go on there. And there's a lot of good stuff over there. The other website, which I strongly recommend, especially if there's any family dealing with autism, is autismcenter.org. Excellent. Lots of wonderful information, free information for families, which I would strongly support.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ken.
We've had a great time speaking to the authors of Marvin's Monster Diary number 5, ADHD Self-Esteem Blues. Our guest has been Dr. Raun Melmed and Caroline Bliss Larsen. My friends, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It's a very special episode. Our friend Yobi Q. She is launching her own podcast. It's called Rise and Shine with Yobi Q. And you are going to be able to hear the very first episode right here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. So you don't want to miss that. That's the next episode of the show. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we're going to start by thanking our guests, Dr. Raun Melmed and Caroline Bliss Larsen. We want to celebrate Marvin's Monster Diary number 5. Check it out today. We also want to thank our sponsors, Lucas and the Game of Chance by Anthony L. Manor, and Monsterious, the great middle grade series by our friend Matt McMahon. I want to thank my team. They're awesome. Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Ann O'Leary, Soji Franklin. I want to thank my beautiful wife. She's amazing, and she is so supportive. I also want to thank you. You're incredible. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and we really appreciate you taking the time to make the world a better place, and you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.